Grief has a sound. It isn't wailing or sobbing, not really. It's quieter, like the hush that falls after everyone leaves a room and the furniture is left to remember. I heard that sound the day we buried my son. The church was full, though it didn't feel that way. Every pew was lined with people who had known him at different times, classmates, coworkers, the neighbor who still called him kiddo, though he'd turned 35. I sat in the front row staring at the polished wood of the casket, at the lilies arranged too perfectly beside it. Lilies, they were his least favorite flower. He used to say they smelled like hospitals, but no one asked me what he liked. I suppose no one knew that anymore except me. Beside me sat Anna, my daughter-in-law, his widow. Her face was pale, but her back was straight stiff as if someone had pinned her there. She didn't reach for my hand, and I didn't offer mine. Between us was a gulf made not of hatred, but of difference. We'd both lost the same man, but not in the same way. When the pastor spoke his name, Ethan James Carter, something inside me clenched, as if the air had been pulled from my lungs. My boy, my only one, gone on a highway I will never drive again. They said it was quick. That's supposed to be comforting. But all I could think was, if it was quick, did he have time to be afraid? After the service, people came with their casseroles and condolences, pressing my hands, whispering cliches meant to soften the edges. He's in a better place. As if there could be any place better than here, where I could still see him, hear him laugh, touch his cheek. Anna stood near the door accepting hugs, her dark hair pulled into a bun too tight for mourning. She looked beautiful, she always did, the kind of effortless beauty that made me feel like a photograph yellowing at the edges. But grief suited no one. When the last guest left, silence rushed in like a tide. She turned to me, then her eyes swollen but dry. "They said we should eat," she murmured. Yes, I said, though neither of us meant it. At home, the house felt smaller, as if walls had moved in while we were gone. I set 2 plates on the table, reflex more than intention. The third, his, remained stacked in the cupboard. Anna sat across from me. The casserole one of the neighbors dropped off steamed between us, chicken and rice. It smelled like every condolence meal I'd ever known. We ate in silence for several minutes. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. I wanted to tell her about the time Ethan burned dinner trying to impress her, how the smoke alarm went off and he swore me to secrecy, but my throat tightened. The story belonged to another world now, one that didn't exist. Instead, I said, "You did well today." She blinked. "At the funeral?" "Yes." "You were composed." Her jaw stiffened slightly. "I didn't know there was a score. I didn't mean I know—" She interrupted, her voice flat. "You meant well." The words stung more than they should have. Meaning well. I used to believe that was enough intention over impact, but grief is impatient with good intentions. We finished our food quietly. When I rose to clear the table, she said softly, "I'll do that." "No," I said, sharper than intended. "You should rest." Her eyes lifted to mine, tired, guarded. "Marianne," she said gently, "I don't know how to rest yet." She stood, gathered the plates, and walked to the sink. The sound of running water filled the room, that small domestic noise that used to mean life went on. But tonight even water sounded hollow. When she went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen. The chair he used to sit in stood empty across from me. His cup, the chipped one with the faded logo, still sat on the counter. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. The handle was smooth from years of use, the rim faintly cracked. I traced it with my thumb. My boy had drunk from this cup every morning before work, leaving rings on the counter I used to scold him for. Now I'd give anything to see one more. The air hummed with the echo of him, his footsteps, his laugh, the faint scent of cologne that lingered on the hallway air. But the house was still. Still except for the ticking of that clock reminding me that time didn't care. I stared at his empty chair and whispered, "You should be here to make peace between us." But there was no answer, just the creak of settling wood. And for the first time since the call came, I let myself cry. Grief rearranges the furniture. Not literally, though. God knows I'd tried that before, back when my husband died. No, grief moves things you can't touch. It makes the air heavy in one room and hollow in another. It turns familiar spaces into strangers. I woke the next morning to find sunlight leaking through the curtains, bold, unapologetic. It annoyed me how light refused to mourn. Downstairs, I found Anna already awake, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee cupped in both hands. She wore one of Ethan's sweaters, navy too large sleeves rolled at the wrists. It hurt to look at her in it. I didn't sleep, she said without turning. Neither did I admitted. She nodded, eyes on the mug. I kept expecting to hear the door. You know his whistle, I smiled faintly. He whistled off key. Always, she said, almost smiling. Then her face crumpled slightly, the hint of a laugh dying on her lips. I sat across from her, uncertain what to say. I'd spent my whole life teaching people, students, my son, even friends, how to fix things. But death isn't a loose seam or a broken hinge. There's no fixing, just enduring. After a while, she said quietly, I'll be heading back to the apartment this week. I just needed. She trailed off, gesturing vaguely. You can stay as long as you like, I said. The offer surprised even me. Her eyes flicked up wary. Are you sure? I nodded. This house still has room for him. It might help not to be alone in it. She exhaled, shoulders loosening. Thank you. But as soon as I said it, I felt the ripple of uncertainty underneath. Sharing a house meant sharing silence, and silence between two women who only knew how to love the same man differently could become a kind of war. Later that day, I walked through the rooms, touching things like they were relics. His books dog-eared stacked beside the sofa, his boots by the door, laces untied. The photograph of him and Anna from their wedding day, him grinning, her radiant, my hand resting awkwardly on his shoulder. That photo always reminded me of how out of place I'd felt that day, a guest in my own son's new life. I'd tried to like Anna. I really had. She was intelligent, independent, everything people praised modern women for being. But she'd been raised differently. Her family lived states away, her mother a college professor, her father an architect. They discussed politics at dinner, something we never did. When Ethan brought her home the first time, she'd shaken my hand instead of hugging me. That should have been my first clue. She built fences out of politeness. We clashed in small ways, seasoning in the stew, how laundry should be folded, the right time to plant tomatoes. Trivial things, the kind that seem harmless until they accumulate like stones in a pocket. Ethan would laugh, say, You're both just strong women. But strength, I've learned, can be a curse when no one bends. After he married her, he called less often. I told myself it was normal, boys grow up, wives become the center. Still, there were nights I stared at the phone, daring it to ring. It wasn't that Anna kept him away. She just didn't bring him closer. Once I invited them over for Thanksgiving. She suggested hosting at their apartment instead so it's easier for everyone. But she didn't mean everyone. She meant me. That was the year I learned how silence could taste bitter. Now she was here sleeping in the guest room, walking through my kitchen in his sweater. Life has a cruel sense of humor. In the afternoon, I went to the garden. The soil was hard with early frost. He'd always been the one to help me turn it each spring, strong hands patient with weeds. I knelt, pressing my palm to the earth. It was cold, unforgiving. Behind me, the screen door creaked. Do you do that every year? Anna asked. Stepping out, mug still in hand. Since he was little, I said. He used to bury toy cars out here. She smiled faintly. He told me once, said you still find them sometimes. I do. I dug into the dirt and held up a tiny red car rusted from years underground. See? She laughed softly, a sound that felt fragile like glass. He never stopped collecting them. There's a whole box in the closet. I know, I said. He asked me to keep them one day, said he'd give them to his son if he had one. The air between us shifted tender, then heavy. We both looked down, avoiding the ache of that if. That evening we cooked together, or rather I tried to cook while she insisted on helping. Our rhythms didn't match. She chopped too fast, I stirred too long. When I reached for the salt, she'd already added pepper. By the time the soup was done, it tasted fine but felt like effort. At dinner, I told her, he used to hate onions. I know, she said. He learned to love them. I made him. I smiled despite myself. That sounds like him. She set her spoon down. You talk about him in the past tense. I looked at her, startled. He's gone, Anna. She shook her head. Not yet. Not until I'm ready. I wanted to argue to say grief doesn't wait for permission, but I saw the way her hands trembled, so I said nothing. Afterwards, she went upstairs early. I stayed in the kitchen cleaning what was already clean. The house was quiet again, too quiet. I found myself standing in the doorway of his old room, the one we turned into a study after he moved out. His jacket still hung on the hook by the door. I pressed it to my face. It smelled faintly of sawdust and cologne. For a moment, I let myself imagine he'd walk through the door grinning, saying, "You two getting along yet?" And I'd answer, "We're trying." Then he'd laugh, that bright, careless laugh that made every argument feel small. But the house stayed still. The chair in the kitchen stayed empty, and I whispered, as I did every night since the accident, "You left too soon, my boy. You were supposed to be the bridge." That night I dreamed of the ocean. Ethan was standing at the edge calling me and Anna to join him, but no matter how far we walked, the waves kept rising between us. When I reached out, he was already gone. When I woke, the house was dark and the wind outside carried a low, steady moan. I turned toward the doorway, half expecting to see his shadow, half hoping never to. Because love, I've learned, doesn't end with goodbye. It lingers, waiting for you to learn its next language. And grief, it just waits for you to listen. Anna told me she would stay for just a little while on a Tuesday that smelled like rain. She stood in the kitchen doorway with a suitcase that looked too small for grief and said it the way people say, "I'll only take a sip when their thirst could drown a lake." "I don't want to impose," she added, even as she set the suitcase down. "You're not," I answered, even as something in me flinched. "There's room. Room." The words sat oddly in my mouth. There was room in this house for a lifetime of habits for conversation that had learned the bends of our walls for Ethan's stride and whistle and the clatter of his keys on the bowl by the door. Was there room for someone else's quiet? We established a rhythm out of politeness. It wasn't a music so much as a metronome. In the mornings, she rose first, her footsteps soft and careful as if the floor might crack under the weight of her. The coffee machine hissed. The kettle sighed. 2 mugs appeared. We didn't ask how the others slept because we didn't want to answer. She liked her toast nearly burned. I liked mine barely touched. She took her coffee black. I sweetened mine with honey I kept in a small jar shaped like a bear, ridiculous and comforting. We learned to move around one another like 2 women in a tight galley kitchen on a ship trying not to capsize. I found her folded sweaters in the laundry room, neatly stacked sleeves tucked like prayer. She found my pruning shears left to dry on a towel, a little rust you can only see if you're the kind of person who looks. We were 2 kinds of people who looked just not always at the same things. Some days the house tried on the sound of him. The floor by the hall vent made the same low complaint it used to when he leapt the last 2 stairs. The wind got into the chimney and hummed the first note of a whistle. When I opened a closet, the smell of his jacket rose up like a hand. Those were the days the air felt crouched, ready to remember. I'd catch Anna pausing near the doorway to his old room, eyes turned toward the corner where nothing stood, as if she could see what I kept telling myself wasn't there. We spoke his name differently. I said Ethan the way you say a prayer, soft at the beginning, softer at the end. She said it like a challenge, clear unbent, as if she could keep him here by refusing to round the edges of syllables with tears. His absence rearranged us into roommates with polite tragedies. I watered plants and trimmed the hedges and pretended the hydrangeas were a problem I could solve with the right cut. She answered emails, then closed her laptop with a wince, as if the hinge itself could feel too much, and said she was taking some time from work. At night, she carried his sweater around the house like a question. At night, I counted forks back into the drawer as if numbers might steady me. The first argument was about light. Late afternoon, thin winter sun making a pale rectangle on the living room floor, I pulled open the curtains the way I always had. The room flooded with a small, brave brightness enough to pick the dust out of the air and set it moving like slow snow. Could we leave them half closed? Anna asked from the sofa. Her voice was careful, the way you speak to an animal you want to pet without spooking. It's a lot. Light is good for the room, I said. Keeps the wool from mildewing. It shows everything, she said. Her hands lay in her lap, fingers laced like she was holding herself still. I'm not ready to see everything. I held the curtain for a beat longer, then let it fall to the halfway point. A compromise. The room recalibrated. Shadows cushioned the corners again. The dust hid itself. Thank you, she said, and looked like she wanted to bolt or weep. I realized we were both trying not to be found out by the light for what we were, women who had been left and were making do. That night I dreamed of chairs. Every room in the house filled with identical chairs, simple wooden ones, ladder back the kind you can mend with a new rung and glue, and each one sat empty. I woke with splinters in my heart and a taste like sawdust in my mouth. On the third day of her little while, a sweater of his went missing. I noticed because I notice. The hook by the study door was bare. I went to the laundry room to see if it had fallen. I checked the back of a chair, the foot of the bed. I told myself I wasn't checking her room. Then I knocked and asked. She stood in the doorway, hair damp, wearing leggings and a sweatshirt of her own. Yes, she said, crisply polite. His flannel, I managed. The green one, a flicker across her face. I took it. I'm sorry, I should have asked. I just, she exhaled. It helps. I nodded. Of course. I meant it and didn't. It was one of those truths made of threads pulled taut in opposite directions. Grief asks you to share what you'd promised yourself you'd never let go of. Love says, let her have what keeps her breathing. Love also says, but don't take the last thing I have of him where I know to find it. Maybe I said slowly, leave a note on the hook so I don't, so I know where it is. She blinked as if I'd offered a contract for signature. A note, she repeated. Okay. When I passed the hook later, a small square of paper fluttered there, borrowed, a pencil gray neat. It felt like both courtesy and a receipt. We learned how to do small things like that for each other, leave a note, move quietly, set the kettle for two, even if you want none. None of it fixed anything. It stitched the day enough to keep our hands busy. And yet the house held echoes that refused to behave. Once I found her standing in the hallway, face tilted up, listening. Do you hear it? She said when she noticed me. It's like a hum. The vent, I said automatically. It hums when the heat kicks. No, she said, brow furrowed. It's lower. I was ready to explain the physics of ductwork to her until the sound rose again, a tone so familiar my hand went to the wall. Ethan had done that sound absent-minded since he was 5, mouth closed, a kind of humming whistle always when he was thinking. We stood there, two women calibrated to his habits, and heard a trick of pipes or memory or bone. The air was full of him for a breath, then it was only air. I hate the hallway, she said quietly. I love it. I answered and understood that these were the same thing, two sides of a rung we were both holding to keep from falling. On the 8th night, the rain returned for real fat drops that made the gutters complain. Anna came into the kitchen in socks and the green flannel damp hair smelling like shampoo and the rain I'd taught my roses to drink. Do you ever feel angry? She asked suddenly as I dried a plate I'd already dried. Not at him, at the world, at whoever is supposed to be at the wheel. I don't have breath to spare for anger, I said, and realized it was true. If I start, I won't stop. She nodded as if we had discovered a law of nature. Me either. We stood there, the clock insisting on the next minute. The chair at the table waited empty and attentive. Stay, I said the word, surprising us both with how quickly it leapt into the air between us. As long as you need. Her eyes filled, then steadied. Okay, she whispered. I'll figure it out as I go. We both were. That night, I set a second glass of water on the nightstand I didn't use and left the hall light on. It made a pale river of brightness down the center of the house. I imagined it as a bridge thin and lit from my door to hers. The floor creaked once in the small hours. In my mind, he stepped over the light and went into her room to tuck sorrow's edges around her. I slept. By morning, the house had accepted our answer. Two toothbrushes in the upstairs bath, two coats on the hook by the front door, two women moving quietly through loops that would hold until they didn't. It would not hold forever. Nothing does. But for now, the echo in the hallway knew both our names, and the chair still empty felt less like accusation and more like witness. The argument waited for us like weather. You can smell a storm before it breaks. You can feel words gathering weight before anyone speaks. It began with the box. I was in the study sorting paper the way you gut a fish carefully with respect for what used to be alive. Bank statements, warranties for appliances that had outlived the marriage. They were purchased for a postcard he'd sent from a construction site in Arizona where the sky looked like a miracle. At the back of the bottom drawer, under a band of rubber gone brittle, I found a small brown box with a strip of blue tape across the lid. Ethan's handwriting. Save. I took it to the kitchen for better light. The house was quiet except for rain on the porch roof and the radio whispering some song my generation keeps in its glove compartment for emergencies. I peeled the tape back, the sound small, treacherous, and lifted the lid. Inside coins, a childish marble the color of a storm, a folded paper football, a pressed ginkgo leaf, three Polaroids of a dog we never owned, and a letter unsent my name on the outside in that same slanted hand. It was addressed to Mom. Under it, a second envelope addressed to Anna. My heart did a small, exhausted acrobatics routine and then sat down. I closed the lid. My fingers stayed on the cardboard as if weight alone could turn the past into something else. Marianne Anna's voice from the hall, then closer. She stepped into the kitchen, rain beating on her eyelashes, sneakers damp. She stopped, saw the box, saw its neatness, the blue tape I'd smoothed on the counter, saw my hands. What is it? She asked. His, I said. A box of him. She came to the table without being asked, the way you go to a ringing phone. I pushed the box an inch toward her. Not mine, not yours, ours, and she reached in, reverent and brisk at once. The marble went to her palm. She smiled. He used to carry this, she said. He said it kept him from fidgeting. She rolled it between two fingers. It didn't. I laughed, relief and pain sharing a cup. Letters, I said, pointing, because I am the kind of person who points at things when my voice cannot be trusted to do all the work. One for you, one for me. She froze. Her eyes went wide like a doe's before bolt. I saw it land what those envelopes could hold, what they could break. Are we allowed? She whispered. He wrote them, I said. He meant us to read them, or he meant to decide when. She put her hand on the lid as if feeling for a pulse. We looked at one another across the table's old scars. Wood remembers every heat ring, every knife you shouldn't have used, every plate dropped and glued. Take yours, I said before I could tidy the impulse into something more socially acceptable. I'll take mine. She nodded, but neither of us moved. Not now, she said, eyes on the envelopes. I can't if it says. She broke off. What if it's a goodbye? It will be one, I said, no matter what it says. She closed her eyes, then not yet. We slid the envelopes back into the box. The room shifted back into being only a room. Where did you find it? She asked, voice thin. In the study, bottom drawer, she swallowed. I've been avoiding that room. I go there to feel him, I said, and the confession made the air warmer. The chair still smells like his jacket. She sank into the kitchen chair like a person who has just now admitted she is tired. I sit in there and read half a paragraph and can't remember the words. The box wasn't hiding, I said. We just didn't look. We let that sit a sentence with a weight we both could see. Rain thickened outside. The gutters hummed. Somewhere deep in the house, the heater knocked. The pipes answered, old men agreeing. What if his letter to you says you did everything right? She asked suddenly. Her voice had an edge I recognized from classrooms and faculty lounges, and the day he told me he would be moving out. The edge meant I want this to hurt less. I want you to tell me how. It won't, I said. No letter can carry that much charity. What if it says you were the kind of mother who gets a gold star? She pushed. What am I, then not my student? I snapped before I knew I was going to. The slap of it ran around the room and came back to me. I swallowed. I taught for 3 decades, Anna. I don't grade women I love. You graded me, she said, standing, because sometimes you need height to hold hard truth. From the first Sunday afternoon, the roast was too dry, the towels folded wrong, the basil cut with a knife not torn. I showed you what keeps things from unraveling, I said, standing too. You came into a life I built stitch by stitch and told me knots were ugly. They are, she said, fierce and shaking. You hide them. I wanted, she threw her hands up, laugh breaking like a plate. I wanted a life where the front and the back looked the same. That's not how quilts work, I said. My voice did a thing I hear when my mother comes into it, a lift on the last word that means, and that's that. This isn't a quilt, she said, palms open, pleading or surrender or both. This is a marriage that ended on a highway. This is a house where I don't know which way to put the forks without feeling like I'm scrubbing at your thumbprint. Forks go teeth down, I said before Mercy could stop me. She laughed, a single disbelieving sound that moved quickly toward anger. Of course they do. We stood in the kitchen like two people on either side of a river we had pretended was a stream. The chair waited between us, empty and useful, and no bridge at all. You think I took him? She said, very quiet now. You think I took your son from a life where the rules made sense and gave him a life where they didn't. That's why you kept serving him plates, kept handing him instructions written in the margin of every visit. You think I lost him long before the accident, I said, and you think I'm making a shrine out of spoons to hide the place where I've been hollow for years. We both breathed a sound like the sea caught in a pocket. Rain battered the porch roof and then settled the way storms do when they're just getting comfortable. I wanted to be let in, she said. She looked at the window but saw nothing there. You had him before me. I had to build my part with new lumber. It creaked. You listened for creaks like proof you'd been right about the structure all along. My throat ached. I wanted to be invited, not tolerated. You placed him in a home where the cups were white and thin and the table legs made of chrome, and no one kept a jar of pennies in the pantry, and words ran out. I shook my head. You like clean lines. I like strong ones. It was always both, she said, and for an instant, her face lost 20 years, and she looked like a girl explaining her art to a parent who wanted practical. He loved that about us. We stretched him into a bigger shape. Then why, I asked, does it feel like I've been living in a smaller one since you came? Her eyes were glossy. She didn't blink. Maybe because you and I both agreed to shrink instead of bend. We went still. The house leaned in. The letterbox on the table made no sound at all, and yet it was the loudest thing in the room. Read yours with me, she said suddenly. Not the words, just at the same time, in the same house, different rooms if we have to, but not alone. I looked at the box as if it might disagree. Tonight. Not tonight, she said. I don't want the rain to have that too. Tomorrow, I said. It felt like offering a hand in the dark and finding one offered back. She nodded. Tomorrow. We stood there breathing like people who had climbed a hill and found not a view but a bench. Anna, I said, because too many sentences had been aimed instead of given. I am sorry for every time I called your choices new, like it meant wrong, and for treating your life like a syllabus with my name in the corner. She laughed softly, tears on her face, now not falling yet, like dew that hasn't decided which blade of grass to run down. I am sorry for every time I called your love heavy when what I meant was here, and for thinking I could sand the grain out of a house that has stood longer than I've been alive. We were both shaking, not with anger anymore, with the effort it takes to set something down, a crack of thunder, sudden impatient. The lights did a small bow and came back up. In the brief dimming, I saw our faces in the window, one older, one younger, identical in the way grief equalizes. Behind our shared reflection, the empty chair. Do you want tea? I asked, voice threadbare. God, yes, she said, laughing that laugh you make when you found purchase on a slope. I moved toward the kettle. She reached for the honey bear. We passed each other in the narrow waist of the kitchen and didn't collide. While the water heated, she set 2 cups on the table and touched the box lightly with one finger. Do you think he knew? Knew what? That we were always going to be the problem and the solution? I smiled at the kettle to keep my face from breaking open for the 100th time. He hoped. The kettle sang its small metal psalm. I poured. She stirred. The storm argued with the gutters, and the gutters argued back. Neither asked us to take sides. We carried our cups into the living room and sat not on opposite ends, not pressed too near, close enough that the light could be shared. We did not open the letters. We did not fix the forks. We did not solve anything at all. We simply drank tea while the rain wrote on the roof, and it was the first time since he died that the words we didn't say felt like balm instead of a bruise. Morning came pale and hesitant, the kind of light that has to ask permission to enter a house like ours. I woke before dawn, unable to shake the weight of the box. It sat on the kitchen counter, small and patient as though it had always belonged there. Beside it, the note I'd written the night before tomorrow. Tomorrow had arrived. Anna was already in the kitchen, hair tied back, wearing his flannel again. Her fingers were wrapped around a cup of coffee, and she stared at the box like it might breathe. Couldn't sleep, I asked. She shook her head. I dreamed of him, she whispered. He was walking down the hall, but when I called, he didn't turn. I know that dream, I said. He's always facing away. She nodded slowly. Then, almost as if speaking to herself, let's do it. We sat across from each other, the same seats we'd taken at the funeral dinner. Only now there was no casserole between us. Just the box. She reached for her letter first. Her hands trembled slightly, but she smiled through it. It feels wrong, she said softly, opening something he meant to give later. Maybe this is later, I said. She nodded. Maybe. She unfolded the paper, her breath catching on the first line. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. My own envelope felt heavy in my hands, as though every word inside had weight. For a long time, the only sound was rain against the window, soft, steady, unrelenting. When she finished, she folded the letter back into thirds carefully, as if afraid it would vanish. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. He wrote about both of us, she said. How he loved that we argued. Said it made him feel like he came from strong women. I managed a smile. He wasn't wrong. What did yours say? She asked. I hesitated, then unfolded it. His handwriting slanted right, familiar as breath. Mom. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say what I should have said more often. You did everything right. You taught me to fix what breaks, but you also made me think everything could be fixed. Some things can't. Don't let that make you bitter. My throat closed. The words blurred. I wish you could see Anna the way I do. She's not trying to erase what you built. She's just trying to find her way inside it. You both think love is a house that has to be arranged one right way, but I learned from you that homes survive because people do. I pressed the paper to my chest. He knew, I whispered. Anna reached across the table, covering my hand. He always did. We sat like that for a long while, 2 women who had loved the same man, now learning how to love what he left behind. Finally, I folded the letter and set it beside the box. What did he ask of you? I murmured. She smiled faintly, to forgive myself for not saving him. The ache that rose between us was almost too much to bear. That wasn't your fault. I know, she said, tears falling freely now. But I think I needed him to say it. So did I whispered. Outside, thunder rolled low, distant, the kind that warns before it strikes. Anna looked up. They said there's a storm coming tonight. I heard I said, we should check the shutters. She nodded. I'll help. It felt like the first promise we'd made to each other that didn't have his name attached. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old pewter. The air was thick, restless. We moved through the house like caretakers preparing for company we didn't want. I closed the windows. She unplugged lamps. When the first crack of lightning split the sky, the lights flickered, then held. I hate storms, she admitted. Me too, I said. Always have. When the wind picked up howling through the eaves, she startled. It sounds like I know, I said before she finished. like him coming home. The power went out, then a single blink, then darkness. For a moment, we just stood there listening to the rain lash the roof. I'll get the candles, I said. I'll find blankets, she replied. In the soft flicker of light, the house looked different, gentler, the edges blurred, the shadows breathed. We sat on the floor in the living room wrapped in quilts, the box still on the table beside us. It's strange, Anna said. Reading his words didn't make it hurt less. It just made the hurt feel honest. Maybe that's what truth does, I said quietly. It doesn't heal, it clarifies. The storm groaned outside, rattling the windows. I reached for her hand without thinking. She didn't pull away. We could read them again, she said softly. No, I whispered. They said enough. We sat in silence. The candlelight trembled between us as if unsure which of us needed it more. The wind roared louder as night deepened. The old oak in the front yard scraped its branches against the siding, a skeletal knock that made the house flinch. Anna had fallen asleep beside the couch, her head resting on a pillow, the quilt drawn up to her chin. I watched her for a long time, her breath steady, her face softened by sleep. Without the armor of her composure, she looked younger, almost childlike. I thought of Ethan then, the way he used to sprawl on this very floor, sketching plans for a deck he never built. His laughter had once filled this house like music. Now only echoes remained. I stood careful not to wake her and went to the window. The rain came in sheets, furious and relentless. A flash of lightning lit the yard, and I saw one of the shutters had come loose, flapping wildly. Damn it, I muttered. Instinct. I reached for my coat. Behind me, Anna stirred. What are you doing? The shutter, I said. If it tears off, it'll break the window. You can't go out there, she said, sitting up. It's dangerous. I'll be quick. She rose, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. Then I'm coming too. We argued with our eyes more than our words. Then I nodded. Fine, but stay close. The rain hit us like applause. Cold, hard, unyielding. We ran around the side of the house, shoes sinking into mud. The shutter banged against the siding with every gust. Hold it steady, I shouted. Anna braced it while I fumbled with the latch. My fingers were slick, trembling from cold. It's stuck. Let me. She reached over, her smaller hand stronger than I expected. Together we forced the metal hook into place. The shutter stilled, hugging the wall once more. When we turned back toward the porch, another gust nearly knocked us off our feet. She grabbed my arm, pulling me close. Careful. We stumbled into each other, laughing breathlessly, rain streaming down our faces. For the first time, laughter didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like survival. Inside dripping, we kicked off our shoes and wrapped ourselves in towels. My heart thudded not just from exertion, but from something else, something that felt suspiciously like release. Anna sank onto the floor, shaking her head. He would have called us crazy. He would have, I agreed, then joined us anyway. We laughed again, and for a heartbeat I swore I heard him, that low, familiar chuckle that always came after a joke only he understood. When the wind eased, we lit more candles and sat by the fire. The room glowed gold, the kind of light that hides years and forgives faces. Anna looked at me, then eyes soft. Do you think he knew how much we both loved him? I nodded. I think he saw it every time we fought over who got to take care of him. She smiled through tears. We did fight a lot. We loved him the same way I said, just from different directions. The words hung there, simple, true. For once there was no need to defend or explain. After a while she said quietly, when the power comes back, I'll move back to the apartment. The thought startled me sharp, unwelcome. You don't have to. I do, she said gently. We've both been living in his shadow. Maybe it's time to find our own light. I swallowed hard. I'll miss you. I'll come by, she promised. If you'll let me, I'll always let you, she smiled. Then maybe this house can stop being a grave and start being a home again. Outside, the wind softened to a sigh. The rain tapered into a hush. The storm had passed, but the air still trembled with everything it had carried. We sat in silence, side by side on the floor, the candles flickering low. The house felt different, not empty, not haunted, just shared. When the power finally returned, the lights blinked on, but we didn't move. We stayed there in the gentle hum of electricity, surrounded by warmth and wreckage, breathing the same steady air. For the first time since Ethan died, I felt the house exhale, and maybe, just maybe, so did we. The storm left the world rinsed clean. When I woke, the house was still not silent, just resting. I could hear the soft drip from the eaves, the low hum of the refrigerator that had remembered its purpose. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and candle smoke. Anna was in the kitchen, barefoot, hair tangled, humming something under her breath. It took me a moment to realize it was one of Ethan's tunes, that off-key whistle now reshaped into melody. She glanced up when I entered. Coffee. Yes, I said. My voice came out rough but not fragile. Thank you. We moved around each other easily, as if the storm had washed away some invisible wall. When she handed me my mug, our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled back. I was thinking, she said slowly, we should go outside. See what the wind did. I nodded. The garden will need help. We put on our boots and stepped into the cool morning. The sky was a pale, forgiving blue. The oak in the front yard had lost a few branches, one of which now rested like a fallen arm across the walkway. Together we dragged it aside, our boots slipping in the mud. The hydrangeas were bowed heavy with rain. I bent to lift a stem, shaking the water free. He used to hate pruning, I said. Anna smiled faintly. He'd always cut too much, or too little. We laughed softly. It felt like speaking a language only the two of us understood, now the dialect of memory. Near the fence, a section of the trellis had collapsed. Anna knelt beside it, brushing away leaves. We could fix this, she said. We could. I agreed. If we do it together. She looked up at me, eyes warm. Deal. By mid-morning, we'd gathered tools from the shed and set to work. The soil was damp but pliable, the kind of earth that holds whatever you give it. As we worked, Anna said, You know he wanted to build a bench here. I remember I said, He drew plans once. I found them, she said quietly, in his drawer. Maybe we could finish it. I paused, hand still on the spade. You mean now, not today, but soon? I nodded. I'd like that. We worked in companionable silence for a while. Then, without looking up, she said, I didn't realize how much of him lived in this yard. Everywhere, I said softly. He was never still. She smiled. You gave him that. Maybe, I said, but you taught him where to go. She looked at me, then really looked. You know I think he's here. I think so, too. We stood for a long moment in the sunlight, our shadows overlapping on the wet ground. Later, we sat on the porch steps, drinking the last of the coffee. The mug was chipped, the handle warm against my palms. Anna leaned back, sighing. When I first met him, I thought he was fearless. Then I realized he just trusted too easily. I smiled. He got that from me. She laughed softly. Then I guess I did too. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of salt from the bay. I breathed it in, letting the world feel wide again. You said you might move back to your apartment, I said carefully. I will, she said, but not yet, not until the garden's done. I'd like that, I said, having you here a bit longer. She nodded. It feels less like his house now, more like ours. The word ours landed gently like a bird finding its branch. I didn't reply, I just reached over and squeezed her hand. She didn't pull away. Sometimes love doesn't need new words, it just needs fewer old ones. That night after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The storm had scrubbed the windows clear, and the moon spilled across the floor like a benediction. I looked at the empty chair, Ethan's chair. It didn't look so lonely anymore, just waiting, like something could still be placed there, maybe not him, but maybe something of him. A photograph, perhaps, or the letter, or maybe just a cup of coffee steaming in the morning light, something to remind me that love isn't erased, it's repurposed. And for the first time, I didn't cry when I looked at it. I smiled. A year passes quietly when you stop measuring it in grief. The seasons turned as they always do. The garden bloomed again, hydrangeas wide and blue. the bench built with our own hands. Anna came by every weekend, her hair longer now, her laugh freer. She brought coffee, sometimes flowers, sometimes nothing at all. We never talked about moving forward. We just did. The house felt lighter, as if it had learned how to hold both absence and presence without breaking. This morning she arrived early carrying a pie. For him, she said. He always loved blueberry. He pretended to, I said, smiling. He didn't like the seeds. She laughed. He'd pick them out and think I didn't notice. We set the pie on the counter side by side in the kitchen that had once been a battleground. Now it felt like neutral ground, home ground. I can't believe it's been a year, she said softly. I can, I replied. Every day has had his name in it. She looked at me, eyes bright. You still talk to him? Always, I said. He doesn't answer, but I talk anyway. She nodded. Me too. At noon, we went out to the garden. The bench stood where he'd wanted it beneath the oak. We'd sanded it smooth, stained it honey brown. On the seat lay a small vase of wildflowers, yellow and white, simple and honest. I placed a photograph beside it, the three of us on his last birthday. He was laughing, arm around Anna, my hand on his shoulder. We looked like a family learning how to belong. Anna reached for my hand. He'd like this, she said. I think he does, I whispered. For a while we just sat there listening to the wind move through the leaves. The garden buzzed softly, bees, birds, the gentle hum of life continuing. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steady. I've been offered a teaching position out west. I turned to her, startled. That's wonderful. I haven't decided yet, she said. Part of me doesn't want to leave. You should, I said gently. He wouldn't want you rooted here. She smiled through tears. You sound like him. Maybe I finally learned to listen. She squeezed my hand. Would you come visit if you'll have me? I said. Always. As the sun began to lower, we returned to the house. She brewed tea. I set the table, 2 cups, 2 plates. Then, without thinking, I placed a third cup at the far end. Anna saw it, her lips trembling into a smile. For him, for us, I said softly, so we never forget who brought us here. She reached across the table, covering my hand. He'd be proud of us. Maybe, I said, but I think he'd be laughing too. Why? Because we finally stopped arguing. She laughed a sound like sunlight. Don't jinx it. That night, after she left, I sat by the window again. The garden glowed faintly under the moon. The bench, the flowers, the photograph, all small, fragile anchors against forgetting. On the table beside me sat the box, the letters, the marble, the pressed leaf. I touched the lid gently. Then I carried it to the shelf near the window, not hidden, not displayed, just there. A part of the room, like the chair, like the air. I turned out the light. The house settled into its soft breathing wood, creaking pipes, sighing memories rearranging themselves. And in the quiet, I could almost hear him again, not as a ghost, but as a rhythm, a hum in the bones of the house. I looked at the chair one last time before heading to bed. Once it had been a symbol of loss, then of absence. Now it was simply a chair ready for whoever needed to sit. I whispered, "Good night, my boy. We're okay now." And I meant it. Epilogue. What stays? Spring returned early the next year. The hydrangeas bloomed brighter than before. The bench weathered its grain, deepening to a soft gray. Anna sent letters from across the country, photos of new gardens, new classrooms, new beginnings. She always signed them, "Love your other daughter." Sometimes I still talk to Ethan while I prune. Sometimes I don't. But every morning I pour 3 cups of coffee, one for me, one for whoever visits, and one for the chair by the window. It's never empty now, not really. Because love, I've learned, doesn't leave with the body. It lingers in the rooms we fill again, in laughter and forgiveness, in the hands we finally reach for, and in the quiet hum that tells us we're not alone anymore.